Hello, all. Thank you for joining the Human Libraries of Procurement podcast. We call this Human Libraries of Procurement for three basic elements: the human connect, the libraries part, which shows knowledge and wisdom, and procurement because we talk about procurement. We have one such human libraries today, Joël Collin-Demers. Joel, thank you for doing this. How are you doing today?
So I'm great. Thanks for having me, Super Tim. It's my pleasure to be here.
Right, Joel. So, Joel, we'll start with your intro, your career journey, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Well, very quickly, right? So I've been in the procurement technology space for 15 plus years now. So straight out of school, I did a business and IT bachelor's degree in a business school here in Montreal in Canada, where I'm based out of, and went to work for IBM Canada in the SAP practice. So started implementing SAP MM straight out of school, which is the purchasing module in SAP. And given I'm also in Quebec, which is the French province in Canada, it was more important that you speak French than you have industry experience, so at
Right.
least from where I was sitting. And so I got great opportunities to do multiple different industries, public sector, pulp and paper, mining, aerospace, etc. And
Wow.
so very within a couple of years I saw throughout most industries procurement was very, very similar. Of course
Right.
they all had their little specificities and idiosyncrasies, but the main process itself was pretty good. In 2012, SAP bought Ariba, so I started building out the Ariba practice within IBM Canada, right? So doing sourcing implementations, spend analysis implementations, contracting, supplier relationship management, and yeah, eventually got to a point where I was seeing the explosion of technology in the procurement space and wanting to do more, wanting to be the best right hand technology man to procurement, as I often say it, right? And I felt like I needed to go out on my own to be able to do that to the full extent of what I wanted to do. So I founded Pure Procurement, I think in 2018, around 8 years. And yeah, and so I did the same type of thing I was doing at IBM, but with Coupa and Ivalua and GEP and Jagger, and then all these best of breed tools like Scievo and SpendHQ and
Right.
Fair Market and Keelvar and Graphite, et cetera, right? So just understanding the space, but also in implementing and helping clients craft digitization roadmaps and then helping them execute on it. So that's what I've been up to the last 15 years. And then more recently, I started the Pure Procurement newsletter, which is essentially a way for me to share everything I've learned over the years to procurement professionals who want to use technology to the best in the best way possible. That's essentially the cliff notes of the career.
First of all, lots of good experience. Well done. Um, I find it fascinating how you said all the tech companies' names in one breath, which was
Yeah.
great. Uh, I also find it fascinating that you have multiple industries and experience is so varied. We'll talk about in more details later on. I have writing of Joel with me. I'll just read it out. Joel is a procurement digitization consultant for over 15 years. And Joel has guided dozens of organizations through technological implementations. His LinkedIn profile says, Your digital procurement mentor. He is also the founder of Pure Procurement, a specialized newsletter that teaches digital fundamentals to 12,000 plus procurement professionals worldwide. His pragmatic approach, rooted in the real world challenges facing procurement team, enables them to demystify the complex technological issues and deliver actionable solutions. So that's the intro that I had. Now, the one thing that stuck the most is that you have a newsletter, conduct something called the Procure Tech Cup. So we'll
Yep.
start with that. What is Procure Tech
Yeah,
Cup?
sure, sure. And that it's funny, right? It sort of happened by mistake, right? And so the ProcureTech Cup is what you see in the background here besides me, which is this ridiculous trophy. And
No, that's nice.
essentially, yeah, and essentially what happened is so there's a tournament, NCAA basketball tournament, which is the collegiate level tournament in the US every year, where you start with 64 teams and teams are in a
Right.
single elimination. You get to the champion of the college basketball teams, right? And people go crazy for it. And I was watching stuff around that, and I was going, oh, I had this idea. It'd be fun if we did the same thing with procurement technology companies, right? And you
Yeah.
referenced the fact that I was naming off a couple at the start of the conversation, but that's only scratching the surface, right? I think the last time someone counted, we were over 650 providers worldwide,
Wow.
right? And I think it's just going to keep going. And so for me, it was just an ability, a way to have people nominate brands that they enjoyed, and then vote people through the bracket to get to champion was the Procure Tech Cup champions. But the whole point was to just have fun,
Right.
bring awareness to our space, awareness to these companies as well, in a fun way without taking ourselves too seriously, right? Because the best solution to me is always a funny term because it always depends on your context, your objectives. What are you trying to do, right?
Right.
And let's find the best solution based on that fit, right? And so the Procure Tech Cup, a yearly event that we run around procurement technology education, awareness of what's going on in
And
the
what
market,
I
and
remember
just
about Cup is that it is pretty serious for some guys. I know some people who were competing very nice in that. And I particularly like the way you segment the companies and how you put them like one against the other. You do it.
yeah, and it's funny, right, that you mentioned that because this year we're actually moving away from that in the sense where when we did the bracket last time, like we tried putting
Mhm.
similar companies in similar parts of the bracket so that when you got to the finals, like you'd have companies that were from different areas or different software categories in our space. But people didn't like getting eliminated, right? And like not being able to participate until the end, which
Right.
I understand, right? And it's also like to me it was like how can we best meet the mission of awareness and education? So we're doing it a bit different this year where it's really just like having people in different categories and then it's just a week of open voting. So nobody gets eliminated, and then whoever has the most votes at the end of the week is the champion of their category. Because to me, that's the most important part, right? Is for procurement professionals and people who look at the space to understand that, like, a sourcing solution does a particular type of thing. A contracting solution does
Right.
something else, right? Same thing with SRM, supplier relationship management. So to me, it's just educating people on the framework so that when they're thinking about their business problem and how to solve them, they're going and knocking at the right doors, right? Searching the right terms online, so to speak, to put a bit of order in the chaos, if I can put it
Right.
that way.
Of course, I like the segmentation part, though I understand why you're getting rid of it. But that was pretty cool. That how many segments we can get in the same process of procurement, right?
Yeah, and it's still so it's gonna stay, right? You're still gonna have segmentation. It's just not gonna it's not gonna be a bracket format. I've never actually counted them, right? But there's everything starts with spend analytics, right? So being able to look at
Yeah.
everything we spend historically and potentially bring in budgetary forecasts, right? So
Mhm.
it's from that we can do uh, category management and sourcing, right?
Right.
And from that we can do contract management, which is formalizing what we did in our sourcing and category management exercises. That turns into procure to pay or operational purchasing, right? So your recs, approvals, purchase orders, MRPs in there as well, receiving, right? So that's for me, it's all operational purchasing. Then we get to AP, which I think of as separately because typically it lies in finance instead of in procurement. It's a different department. It might be your shared services, right? And then finally, supplier relationship management, which is kind of there throughout the entire
Yeah.
cycle. And then intake and orchestration is sort of the newest category of capabilities and of solutions. And that is essentially the way that we can intake everybody from a single front door and also orchestrate those requests across, well, does it need sourcing? Does it need a contract? Does it need a new supplier created? Do we go straight to catalog, et cetera? Since like all solutions don't fit neatly into those blocks. Like you can have solutions that give you four of those blocks, two, one, all of them. And
Right.
just a way to think about conceptualizing these different capabilities that you need in your business. And then to think about how you're going to put stuff together depending on your objectives and what you can find as offerings on the
Right.
market to meet
And
those.
it can be one of the ways to see procurement in general as well. We
Yes.
talk about 7 steps of sourcing, let's say, but I think this is another way of seeing things as well. How deep one thing goes. Like
Yep.
spend analysis is pretty deep if you see it in technological terms, and there
Yep.
are layers to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
And
and that's
yeah,
But just to finish on that point, right?
Mm.
That's why I structured it that way, because to me it was like the perfect link between how the technology market is structured and like the modular approach that certain solutions use and have traditionally used with source to pay suites, and how procurement thinks about their business processes, right? And so
Yes.
yeah, so that's why I've structured it that way, because I thought,
That's where I wanted to go in that. Now let's talk about your newsletter.
sure. Yeah. So
So,
I think newsletter is the main communication channel for, or knowledge sharing channel, if I can put it that way. So it's the Pure Procurement newsletter, and we've essentially what that was also kind of a mistake, funnily enough. So what happened is I have a consulting practice, right? And I was going from client to client and frustrated because every time I would go to a new client, like we had spent all this time building maturity and understanding and reflexes and digital literacy with client number one. Then I get to client number two and boom, we need to start
right.
all over again from scratch, right? And I was going, there's got to be a better way like to do this. So selfishly, I started writing articles to say, hey, I'm coming, Mr. or Mrs. Client, in a couple of weeks, read these two or three articles, right, based on what we're going to be doing.
Mm.
And it'll allow us to shorten the time to value because we're going to be on the same page quite literally from the start, right? And then I ended up just publishing them on LinkedIn, getting good feedback and figuring, okay, what's the best way to deliver this content? And eventually settled on a newsletter. It's been almost 200 weeks where we've sent it weekly, right? And it's always centered around an article where short article, 5 to 10 minutes max, and really around like a reflex or a lessons learned or a trend or something you should be aware of as a procurement professional who's interested in technology. And then of course there's been additions and I used to do it monthly. Now I do it weekly, and so it's been like a journey of upping our game on providing as much value as possible to people through that medium as well. The YouTube is more, people ask me around demos for the Procure Tech Cup, right? I'd like to see a demo before voting. So okay, well
Right.
let's put together a show. Let's do some demos, right, for people who are willing to do them. And where do we put them? Well, let's put them on YouTube, right? We're all things that essentially were responses to questions or asks or things that I was already doing. And it was just a natural evolution of like testing stuff out and finding the best spot for it, right? So to that point, YouTube, I think like, this podcast and what you're doing with your YouTube channel, like you're doing pretty great. And it's completely different content from what I'm doing, and mine doesn't get really organic search results on YouTube. So those are things I need to think about if I want to grow the YouTube channel, but it's not the primary medium,
Right.
right? It's just a
So I'll put the newsletter and the YouTube link in the comment. That's one way of getting you some search,
I
and mine
appreciate that.
also.
Can I
So
ask you a question?
yes, please.
Yeah, so you've been in this space, whether it's on LinkedIn or with this podcast now for many years. So I'm curious to know what drives you to create content, to do these interviews.
So for me, how I see it is that procurement has been a career saver for me. I keep saying it. I was not going anywhere with my career at one point of time, uh, and by all means, I treat it as a miracle that happened. Somebody took a huge chance on me. Because of that, this is my way of giving back to the community.
Mm,
So there is no other good reason for having a YouTube channel for a guy like me. So that there are a lot of smart people, a lot of intelligent people that are there, and there are freshers and all. Like I was a fresher at one point of time. I want this to be a gateway for them to explore, uh, not get the answers to everything, but at least get that questioning started. And then they contact you or somebody else, and then they start exploring, doing research and all that. That's basically where I come from.
oh, I love it. I love it.
Now I'm just doing my part. Getting back to your career journey, and we talked about procurement consultants to be one of the hardest space to be in. How do you see procurement consultant? And
Yeah, and I would put a nuance on it in the sense where, so I've always done procurement technology consulting, right? So
right,
like implementation, there's a business case, we put a tool, we try to get at the business case, get the benefits. And so I've never done pure procurement, pun intended, right? In the sense where I show up as a category manager, for example, and then run events or run a category strategy from a procurement standpoint, right? I've always been in the shoes of I come into a department and we look at what you're already doing. Yes, there's an aspect of like potentially changing the way we're doing things from a process or strategy standpoint, but it's always because that's supported by technology, right? So it's either like using your existing tools better or introducing new tools or new concepts, new architectures so that we can change the paradigm of how we execute the work to get a different result, right? I'll give you a concrete example, like a marketplace or a catalog marketplace. Like if you're sourcing parts, three bids and a buy for MRO parts today, right? And for spot buy parts, right? Not your replenishment with MRP. Well, if you had access to a catalog marketplace where you have all of the catalog items from vendors, from your MRO vendors, and you're able to search them very quickly, then you can give that to users, right? And then you just control the content that's on there, and the users will do the work for you of sourcing because they're going to have multiple results for every search for a bearing or for whatever else, right? Like, how can we change the strategy by using technology to get a better result? And so that in any type of consulting, that's the hard part is like you need to come into a team and very quickly, add value. And so you need the soft skills and the hard skills to be able to do that. It's that's the tough part, right? Is you're layering on a bunch of different skills, and you need to be pretty good at all of them to be able to deliver on your promises.
Right. Very nice. You started by saying that you have worked on different industries and
Yep.
procurement behaves mostly similar across industries. What are your findings about, different industries and how procurement does things there?
Sure. I usually put industries in like 2/3 big groups, right? The first group is people that have simpler, not simple, but
Right.
simpler indirect procurement business where, they don't do MRP, they don't have inventory, they don't manage material masters or article masters or however item masters or however you want to call them. Those are the three big things where if you're managing that, then you're probably managing, direct procurement type purchasing, right? And I
Right.
say type purchasing because like MRO, for example, is not usually considered direct purchasing from a
But it
cost
is
of
linked to
goods
it.
sold.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bought in the same way,
Right.
right? I said indirect first, which is people that don't do that, right? So banking, financial services,
Yep.
software as a service companies, etc. Then there's manufacturers which have those three components, right? At least
Yes.
one of those three, right? And so there's a complexity there, and they're also probably doing indirect procurement as well. So they're buying professional services, they're buying office supplies and widgets that don't go into inventory, they go straight to expense. And then the third one, which is why I said 2.5, is like public sector, where public sector is going to be a mix of those two, but with like an additional complexities related to the legislation and policies that are much more complex than in the private sector, right? And so I'm always going into a client with like, okay, where are they in those three buckets? And then I have like a default architecture or a default set of assumptions going in. And then the,
Right.
the work is usually to like challenge those and or validate those assumptions with the client and ensure that we're all on the same page in terms of here are the best tools based on your spend profile and the categories that are important for you from a technology standpoint.
Yeah. I like the way you segment things to get more simplicity in the thing.
Yeah.
Because it is very easy to get into the complexity and just get carried away with it. Because procurement, in a sense, is a huge world and can get into certain things and lose your way into it, right?
Yeah, and that's a lot I've done it for myself because I need, humans need categories and buckets to make sense of the world, even though they're probably too simple, right? But they're
Right,
useful. And then so it's going through that simplicity to get to the complexity because you're absolutely right, right? Like I'm thinking of just like a pulp and paper client where they're buying recycled paper and the humidity factor of that paper has an influence on the price and the weight. The trucks that come in with it need to be weighed when they come in, and they need to be weighed when they come out. And then we need to consider the humidity factor to figure out the price after we've received it based on weight,
right.
right? Like super complex to do, but to me it falls into that manufacturing path. And then I've got the direct purchasing and there's some MRP stuff in there. And so we could get really granular into the detail but to me it falls into that wider framework that we discussed earlier, right? It's just like a sub process within that framework.
Right. And the reason I say this is because I'm more talking from a buyer's perspective. A lot of time we get this feedback that you don't even know to the fullest extent what you're buying. And to that we always answer that, we don't need to, you know.
Yep.
There are things that we don't need to know because we need to be a little distant from it, and you need to find that simplicity in that process rather than making it too complex, and it becomes too like jargonish kind of thing.
But that's also where the magic happens, right? Because you're
Right.
bringing you're bringing
Yeah.
your process expertise, like your requester or your internal stakeholder is bringing their domain expertise of that commodity or how it gets used in operations, what's important. Like, is the humidity important? Like, I don't
Mhm.
I don't know, right? Like they
Right.
know that, they bring that to the table. And then when you add me to that trio and you've got somebody
Mhm.
that has the technology chops, right? Like very interesting stuff can start happening there. Your procurement's bringing in the strategies, we're bringing in like the art of the possible with technology, and you just get to a better, a result that is worth more than the sum of its parts, right? And that's to me that's what keeps me going, right? Is seeing that
Yes.
happen over and over again.
Yes. One of the key things about this podcast is also to get to what gets you going. I think that is pretty important. Before we move on, I see three maps there. One map as a globe. Uh, Please tell us the story about
Yeah,
these
yeah,
and
I
what.
think so. It's funny, right? I was telling you, you're one of the only people that has ever pointed out the maps, but I love really good, well-drawn maps, and I find that most maps are rubbish, right? And it's funny because there's a parallel there to draw with procurement
Yeah.
and procure tech,
Right.
but let's not
Yes.
get into that. So I found these maps, which are maps of Canada that were hand drawn in an atlas in the 1860s, and
Wow.
they're just beautiful, right? So they're colored by hand, they're shaded by hand, like you have the railroads, all of this stuff, and they're over 150 years old, right? And I see them every day, and I've got like North America, Ontario, and then Upper and Lower Canada, which is essentially Quebec and modern day Quebec and Ontario. And when you look at those maps, you see that like the provinces are different, the naming is different, right? Things
Right.
have changed over 150 years, right? And while there's things are recognizable, there's a lot of things that are unrecognizable, completely different,
Yeah.
right? And so to me, it's like a daily reminder that things are always changing, things are always in decay, especially on the technology front. Like you're always needing to maintain stuff as well.
Right.
And yeah, and that things change, right? Like past 50 years of human history has probably like been the most stable in the history of
Right.
humankind, right? That's been the anomaly. And now in the news these days, like there's a lot more changes,
Yeah.
so to speak, right? And so, yeah, so to me, it's just a daily reminder that, the things that might feel urgent or important or critical in the moment, in the grand scheme of things, probably aren't, right? And so it's a daily reminder not to take myself too seriously in what we're
Yes.
doing, even though we're doing serious things and they matter and they're fun and they have impact, right? I think it's finding the balance between those two things. They're also
Right.
art to me.
Yes. Yes, it is art. When you said that, how much detail you want to get into it, and how much, from a distance you want to see it. And I think
Yeah.
that is a parallel between the maps and procurement. You
Oh,
can get
absolutely.
into a lot of details, and you can also sit back and look at from a distance.
That's right. That's right. And like there's a Google Maps analogy to be made too, right? Where like you can click the plus sign
Right.
and the
Yes.
minus sign. And like so to me, the frameworks that I use are like more higher level, but then when you
Mhm.
double click within your business, then we can look at the architectures, we can look at the processes, the different commodities and categories, right? But yeah, absolutely maps and these are categories where like that part hasn't been drawn in yet, right? We're just kind of doing what
Right.
we want to do, and so we need to go seek it out as adventurers. And yeah, it's a good analogy, good parallel to make for sure.
Right. And that also reminds me one more thing, the purchasing chessboard. If you see the
Yep.
chessboard, there are four major strategies that are there. And then when you break it down, you have 16 of them, each strategy having four blocks. and then you have 64 of them together.
Yeah, and depending on how you're exposed to that chessboard, like
Yeah.
either you tune out because you're coming at it from the 64, right? And you go like, ah, that's too much to make sense of, right? I'm not even gonna try. Whereas
Mhm.
if you come at it from the top where it's like, hey, 4, 16, etc., like it gives you a way to manageably digest and consume the chessboard and to master it ultimately, right? So that's I think that's important too to think about like there's a human tendency for us to want to make things simple and to organize them and to categorize them. And so to me, that's the key to unlocking, well, in our case, digital literacy, right? It's like
Right.
here's how you think about it very simply, small, very short article, but you can then zoom in and read for hours and hours around each of the boxes and the processes within those boxes.
Success stories or any stories that you would like to share from your experience in procurement.
Very early on in my career, like I kind of saw the path, if that makes sense, right? So, I outlined the framework earlier in our conversation, and for me, my career path was always like, hey, how can I opportunistically like go fill in another block in that framework, right? And like
Right.
and understand it better and potentially even modify my framework because I just learned something new, right? And so
Right.
so it was very clear to me just because I was like, oh, I like procurement, right? I think we give ourselves, especially when we're a bit younger, like a lot of pressure to have it all figured out and
Mhm.
to know what we want to be when we grow up. But the reality is like, and you may be able to confirm, right? You never really know what you want to
Right.
be when you grow up, right? I still don't know when I'm in my
Yeah.
30s. And so I always tell younger folks, like, just do stuff that you find interesting, right?
Right.
Actually, three things, right? Stuff that you find interesting and you enjoy, that you're good at,
Yes.
because you'll have an advantage over other people in that same space, and that the market values, right? That people are willing to pay you for, right?
Right. That
And if
three
you find
circle thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and if you find something at the intersection of those three things, just do it. Like you're gonna have a good time, you're gonna learn stuff, you're gonna be good at what you do, you're gonna be able to charge a premium for it on the market eventually as you gather
Right.
steam and knowledge, right? And so I knew that or I understood that fairly young. And so I was like, oh, procurement, is it glamorous? No, most people don't even know what it is, right? And then I had the tech aspect of it because I enjoyed technology and it came easily to me,
Right.
right? And so, you marry procurement with technology, you get procurement technology, consulting, right? And organizations, they don't often need me, but when they do need me, like, differentiated in the market, right? Like I have a baggage that's very interesting and that brings a lot of value, right? And so that's the way I approached it when I was younger, right? Around how to navigate my career. I was always thinking of like, okay, how do I add an additional string on my bow
Right.
so that I become, those three circles, like the surface area becomes wider and wider in the middle. Fact that you're always talking about the same things, but it's always different.
Right.
So I'm always talking about the same, spend analysis, category management, sourcing, contract management, purchasing, accounts payable and supplier relationship management, and then intake and orchestration, but always in a new industry, a new context, a new category, a new business unit, a new country, different considerations from a cultural standpoint, and that remains interesting
Right.
to me.
And one of the things that keep coming up is that procurement wants that seat at the leadership table.
Yeah.
Yes. And what do you say? Like, is it even needed?
Well, I think it's, procurement is viewed as a support function to the
Right.
business, right? So I start there. Same thing with IT, unless you're a procurement consulting firm, right, or something like
Mm.
that, where like, but still the procure like they have a procurement function, which is a secondary function. Or where I'm going with this is that procurement's not the only one with this challenge or with this problem. Like same thing for IT, same thing for compliance and internal audits, a business that aren't the core business or from a value chain standpoint. And so I think it depends on the context. Like of course you wanna grow your influence and you wanna do work on the strategic projects for the business, but the best way to do that, regardless of which function you sit in, is to be empathetic, right? Is to view the world through someone else's reality who's
Right.
in a position of strategic decision making. right? And then being able to say, okay, well, how do they view the world? What's important to them? And then how can I apply my knowledge and expertise to that mission, to that objective, right? Show them the money, so to speak, right? Show them the value, show them that you're a strategic thinker, and you will be included in strategic conversations. A very overused expression, right? But it's more just thinking about how do I create as much value for my business? Like people will see us as strategic and valuable, right? It's just going to happen as a byproduct.
Right. And that show me the money kind of thing is what gets us to savings. That's what
Yeah.
we keep talking about. There are two sides of it. Some people say that we talk only about savings, which is not right. Some people say that, that is something that is universal in that nature, that everybody understands money. How do you see savings and, or should we talk about values?
Yeah, and I wish I hadn't said show me the money, right? Because and you said the answer right there, which is it's all about value, and value is subjective. It's not
Right.
objective, right? And so since value is subjective, it is based on how the person you are talking to views the world, right? Which comes back to being empathetic and defining value with them in their context. And that definition of value may change over time as well, right?
Yes.
Like value for oil and gas right now can be like just
Yeah.
supply assurance, right?
Mhm. Right.
Versus trying to optimize for price, right? And so if you're trying to optimize for price, but we're not even able to, secure supply, then, we're operating on two different planes of reality. And so it's being in tune to that based on your category scope of influence, and yeah, and then value is the ultimate indicator, and savings can be part of that or can be all of that in context, but it's definitely not. Shouldn't lead the other way around. Savings does not equal value, whereas value can equal savings.
No, but I still like the point that you got, that it is about money because money is something that everybody understands, and that also gets me to the maps again. That 150 years ago, how you term things is not what you term now.
Mm.
Things are changing, and that's the only constant.
Absolutely, that it's going to change, and it
Yeah,
goes back to that definition of value is going to change over time with your stakeholders. And to draw another parallel or another example, it's like what you value as an individual in your life and in your career changes over time as well, right?
right,
So at the beginning of your career, maybe you'd rather have a higher salary, less
right,
vacation, right? But
mhm,
then as you have kids, like, oh, maybe I'm willing to sacrifice
right.
salary for more time, right? And or I want opportunities for advancement. I want to work on bleeding edge stuff. I want, so as a manager, you also want to be checking in with your employees over time to understand how their definition of value from their work changes. And it's the same thing with your internal stakeholders and how they view growing their business or their P&L, or like marketing from one year to the next might be a lot more focused on in-person events versus doing virtual stuff. And
Yeah, and I think that also reminds me when we were young, we were told a pyramid kind of where when you start your career, your designation and your money is important, and then what is the impact that you are creating that is important, and then what are you doing for society is important, and then your prestige important. I forgot what the pyramid is called, but at that point, it didn't make any sense to me because I thought that, I would only be interested in the lower block, like money, right?
yep.
And more importantly, for me, procurement was very interesting because I get to spend money, which is not mine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But yeah, things change over the period of time. That's correct.
And it's been a hard lesson for me to learn as well, but like people do not see the world the same way that you do, right?
Right.
And this gets to be more evident like as you grow older and get in, your scope of relationships and the scope of your network becomes international, right? Like you start seeing that even more evidently, but even within your smaller community, right? Or just within your business, like people don't see the world the same way, right? Like I have a bias towards using technology, right? And I always thought like in the beginning of my career, like
Right.
Self-evident, right? Like, it's just apply technology to this problem and
Yeah.
like we get an exponential return and it's amazing, right? Like,
Right.
am I the only one seeing this, right? But and in some cases, yes,
Yeah.
yes, I was, right? And
Right.
so like that was it's one thing to understand it on paper, right? That, but then it's another thing to internalize it and then to change your behavior on that basis. It's a simple lesson that sounds really, really easy when you say it out loud. Like I'll illustrate this other way, right? I never understood why candle shops didn't go out of business because
Right.
I've
Right.
never bought a candle in my life.
Right. Yeah.
And yet the business survives, right? And so people value different things.
Yeah. That's a great note. Uh, I'll continue with tech and procurement, the cusp
Sure.
that is there. Your LinkedIn profile says you are a translator between procurement and IT.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit more. How do you see this
Yeah,
role?
so I'm a technologist first and foremost, right? Like I did business school in IT, but like IT always came easier to me. And in those first projects, like IBM was a great school for that, where you have something called the software development lifecycle, right? Where
Right.
you have requirements or you have design, right? You have an idea that you flesh out, and then you build it, right? Either with configuration or development or what have you. Then you test it, right? You test the heck out of it because when you start testing it, you're going to realize that
Yeah.
there were gaps in your thinking, and then you can fix those problems. Like go back to do design, build, test, and that's where implementing agile helps because you can do multiple cycles and then you deploy, right? And deploying is like putting in production, giving it to people to actually use. And hopefully you did a good enough job of like modeling reality, in those first three steps so that when you get to the last step, like things actually work, it gives the value that you want to people using the technology, right? And professionals of all stripes, right? Like white collar professionals need to develop what I'll call like business analysis thinking, right? So like business process design, business process management, understanding the software development lifecycle and how you get, how you apply the art of the possible or a technological idea to a business problem, and then how you deploy it from an IT standpoint, and then
Right.
how you put a continuous improvement process in place, right? Because you might do a big release, a big deployment to put a solution live the first time, but you need to keep improving it and changing it over time, right? Every system needs a parent, so to speak, right? And that
Right.
parent needs to have a business analyst mindset, right? Of like, okay, let's get feedback, let's categorize it, let's catalog it, like what's the highest value thing we could change or fix in our process slash our system, and then let's route it through with the appropriate people that have the skills needed to change the systems or to change the process or to take the decision, and let's get that to production. And then we need to communicate to everybody, hey, we've got this new change, like we're working like this now. Everybody gets it, adopts it, and then we do it all over again, right? Like, of
Mhm.
course, my expertise is in procurement, but these principles apply in any
Right.
function. Like, well, you need to start understanding IT and that how that works as best as possible. And so that's why I describe myself at that intersection, is I feel like you need the procurement domain expertise, right? You need to have your SIPs or understand the processes and the value levers and your chessboard, etc. But
Mhm.
you also need to understand the IT stuff, right? Like the software development lifecycle, as software architecture to a reasonable degree, right? How an interface works with
Right.
ETL, extract, transform, and load, like what an API is and how you use an API in the world, right? And so when you take those two sets of knowledge and you bring them together, sparks fly, right? And cool stuff starts happening.
That's the place we want to be, right? Now, one of the things that come next is once you have established that, okay, you need IT or this is IT and this is procurement, and you said that, you mixed both of them and you have magic there. One of
Yep.
the things that come out is the digital procurement. How do you select a digital procurement tool? And what are the things that you look at when you are implementing it?
Yeah. So the first thing is I would recommend people, and that's why we do the show, that's why we do the newsletter, is you always want to be ingesting
Right.
news, right? Or insights into what the art of the possible is, right?
Yeah.
Like I'll give you a concrete example, like, smart vision or computer vision technology, right? Being able to look at a document with
Mhm.
a computer and like extract the information that's on that document in an electronic format in structured data fields, right? So
Right.
that's a skill or that's a capability that's enabled by technology and is a possibility, right? It
Yes.
has nothing to do with procurement, right?
Right.
It's just a technological
Yeah.
capability. But then you can start thinking, oh, I can apply it to our
Right.
invoices,
Right.
or I can apply it to our bill of lading. So first thing is like developing that muscle of keeping in touch with the art of the possible and seeking out sources such as the Pure Procurement newsletter. Plug here for that, but that keeps you up to date on what that art of the possible is. Second thing is you go back, like leave technology behind, go back to business basics 101, which is what is our objective? Like what's our strategy? Is it to to differentiate? Like what is your CEO saying? What is your
Right.
C-suite saying in terms of like where are we making investments? Where are we going? What's our strategy? What are we trying to do? Right? And then how does procurement enable that, right? And so you look at the spend profile of the business, like spend, where are the big buckets, right? Is it professional services, like 20% of our spend? And then we've got, I don't know, construction and raw materials, and if you're in a manufacturing context. And so if we want to generate value for the business, we need to look at and optimize how we're sourcing and how we're buying those categories, right? And so the sourcing strategy goes with the purchasing strategy, right? We talked about one earlier around catalog content and marketplaces, right? Which is like
Yeah.
a self-service purchasing, but the sourcing strategy is managing the content, and optimizing prices based on that. But you could also have like, a long-term agreement with a single source, right? Which is another strategy. But then if you're going to do that, then you probably want to make sure that when you're purchasing, like you might only have one PO, right? So from a P2P standpoint, like what's important is having the statements of work and the deliverables and being able to track those over time and making sure you're realizing value, right? And so it's getting intimate with like each category, like where is the value in that category? Is it in sourcing? Is it in contract management, contract obligations, or is it in P2P? Or, is it we're getting a bunch of invoices and it's an operational savings that we could go get, right? And the answer is going to be different for different categories within the business. If you start doing that, you look at your spend profile, you start elaborating a couple of sourcing / purchasing strategies based on the art of the possible at the very front of the process, right? Talking with colleagues, going to conferences, reading newsletters, etc. Then and white papers, then you're going to start seeing the pieces come together. And then it's sitting with IT and road mapping it out and saying, okay, well, if we want to help the business achieve X, Y, or Z objective for procurement, what that means is, changing our sourcing strategy here, changing our purchasing channel or purchasing strategy here, and using technology X, Y, and Z to do that. Then it's going, okay, let's do this first, let's do that, and going out to the market with your IT team to put numbers to it, to start building the business cases, right, for transformation. And what I do is help organizations through that entire process, and then also post solution selection, like if we need project management or business analysis skills to help get us through that cycle of design, build, test, deploy, right? I can
Right.
help with that too.
You covered the part that how do you select somebody, uh,
Yep.
but but there is a lot of risk involved into it. It's a huge purchase. What are the warning, red flags that we should be looking at?
Yeah, and then maybe if I can reframe the question around mitigation, like how do I mitigate
Yes.
those
How?
issues,
Yeah, that's
right?
more constructive. How do we mitigate the risk? Yeah.
Yeah, because the risks are like you pick a partner that doesn't, hasn't done this ever, and shady references
Yeah.
or no references at all. And one of the books that I love on this is called How Big Things Get Done.
Okay.
Great book around project management and scoping. So a lot of it is like, how do we eliminate as many variables as possible, right? How do we and how do we remove the risk? Because what is a risk? It's an unknown factor that might come hit us and create an issue, right? And so how do I take one decision that eliminates the need for 1,000 other decisions and
Right.
or eliminates variables, right? And so I always advise like starting small,
Yeah.
right? And what's the smallest viable scope that you could do,
Right.
right? Is it like a solution for one business unit for one category with like 3 people involved, right? If I can do that and sell it to leadership, like let's do that, right? Design, build,
Yeah.
test, deploy, like a really small scope, but then it's going to be in reality, right? People
Right.
using it in the day-to-day business, and then we get feedback. We get a feedback loop, right? And we're able
Yeah.
to say, okay, we didn't get this right. We need to change this until it works because we're so very bad at like you know, designing 100% of what we need at the start as well as humans. And so it's giving ourselves that laboratory or experimentation runway. And then it's counterintuitive because you go, oh, if we start small, like we're never going to finish, right? But what ends up happening is you can then take really big steps, right? You go, okay, it's three people, it's a whole business unit.
Right.
It's a business unit, it's the whole division. It's the division, it's the whole company, right? Or the whole country, and then you go country to country. But you end up going on this trajectory that's exponential in terms of value realization. Whereas the tendency in a lot of these projects is like, oh, let's start off with a pretty decent scope because we want to get benefits immediately at the start, right? And that looks great on paper, but what ends up happening is like you've got too many variables to control, right? Too
Right.
many stakeholders, too many opinions, too many things to configure and consider and think about. And
Mhm.
so what ends up happening is you try to go live to get to this big scope from the start, but like you fail halfway up the mountain, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And the project never goes live, or only a portion of it goes live, or you're in escalation meetings all the time. You never get to the benefits on paper. And like 50 to 80% of projects, depending on like the surveys year over year from digital transformation, like fail to meet the initial objectives, right? And that's people think you need to think big but act slow, right?
Right.
Which is you need to plan, you want to plan the vision, where you're going, why you're going there, but then act slow and give yourself that hockey stick trajectory, um, because you want to be on solid foundations, and you can't be if you have too many variables to juggle in your first deployment.
So
Yeah.
which one works better? Do you think big and go slow, or you think small and then you just speed things up and show good results?
Yeah, well, I think if you think small, and let's define terms, right? Thinking big to me is like having a vision that's not
Right.
necessarily supported by a specific piece of technology, but you know what capabilities you want to develop and how you're going to support the entire business, with level one detail, right? And then as you deploy, you go a little bit deeper, but there's a holistic picture guiding you. Whereas when you say think small, to me, it's like, hey, let's just
Yeah.
solve this one problem, right? And then we'll figure it out afterwards,
Right.
what the next step is, right? And that I advise against, right? If only because, if I can use an analogy to illustrate, it's like saying like, okay, like I'm in the corner of my house up there, like we need to paint a room. I need to wax the floors, right? I'm gonna
Right.
start waxing the floors. And then, oh, I'm gonna end up in a corner of a room and or I'm gonna forget the closet. And then I can't go into the room and do the closet now. I need to like redo it again, right? So you run the risk of doing stuff over multiple times. It's important to have that target, to have that guiding vision and the principles. But acting slowly means like deploying it in small chunks and getting more and more ambitious in how you deploy it, as you have the foundations and they're proven in operations.
Right. I mean, we always talk about risk and red flags and all that. But one of the key things is also success stories that come to your mind, that we can share.
Case studies are like a double-edged sword because I find they're often very polished and they
Right.
don't give you the full story.
Yeah.
Although the benefits might be what they promised, right? But then the question to ask is like, but what was the initial scope or the initial vision? How did
Right.
that look
Yes.
like? And that's typically not as well covered in those types of case studies, right? So there's nothing that comes to mind specifically. Um, but what I would say is as you're picking people and or scopes and or projects to do, like the worst thing is to be the first one doing something, right?
Right.
Like because you're gonna have a tax and if you're willing to do that, like if you're trying to get a competitive advantage, like fine. Like in our space as procurement, implementing technology, the best thing we can do is get people and systems that are proven, right? And to do our own homework on references and ask the right questions, right? Around like, okay, how did you chunk this out, right? What are the risks
Right.
that you mitigated or the issues that you met and why? And if you had to do it over again, like what would you change, right? And so as much as possible, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You don't want to do something for the first time. You want to do something with a team of people that have already done it,
Right.
and you want to do it, in a novel context, but essentially you want to copy paste as much as possible from another relevant area. right? You don't want to copy paste something just to copy paste because it might not apply to your situation, but you want to find like the scale and the types of projects that are similar to what you're trying to do. And that'll give you the best indicator of how long it should take, how expensive it's going to be, instead of trying to do a bottom-up exercise where you ask everybody in your own business who's never done this before, like how long is this going to take? Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I like that idea that, maybe because I'm old school, I was told that if your problem statement is correct, you get an edge naturally in that sense.
Yep, for sure.
And then, like you said, you can do your research. One of the ways is to see your newsletter or your YouTube channel. Tend to find out what is there in the market.
And you're giving me an idea, right? Where I think case studies are useful in
Mhm.
pointing you in the direction of where you should look, right? So,
Right.
like, if you see a case study, right, I wouldn't necessarily just take the case study as a fact and or your source data, right? Think of it as like it's a polished version of source data, right? And
Right.
so, but you now know which organization and like which people were involved in it, and so you can reach out to them and try to have private conversations, right? Because it's crazy how much more information and how much more insight you will get into a project or into having useful information for you to use. I'll call them offstage conversations, right?
Yeah.
Behind the scenes conversations.
So one of the things that come up in a digital procurement implementation is about estimation, both in terms of cost as well as timelines.
Yep.
Um, could you tell us as to how you estimate?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And it kind of links back to what we were discussing around, the risks and the books that I referenced earlier, how get big things gets done.
Right.
And it's also Thinking Fast and Slow is another good book around this, right? Around
Yes.
planning. And I actually covered this on the newsletter a couple of weeks back. There's a concept called reference class forecasting, right?
Right.
And so when we do a budget, we typically, to your point, all align on the problem, the solution, and then we ask everybody who's going to be involved, like, hey, how much time are you going to take? Like, how much time are you going to take? And we try to do a project plan from the bottom up. What reference class forecasting is like it's more of a top-down approach to saying instead of trying to do that way, to plan that way, which you're always going to be under the amount of time that it's going to actually take, and the bigger the project, the more true that is. So reference class forecasting is flipping that around and saying, let's look for other projects in other similar contexts, whether it be organizations or the types of technology that we're deploying in other industries. And let's look at how long that took, right? And how much that cost. And let's create a sample 10, 12, 20 projects, right? And get the data on the timeline and the dollar amount. And then let's make a distribution with that, right? You're probably going to get like a normal curve. The more projects you have, the more your curve is going to look like a normal distribution. And so you could estimate like your starting point is the middle of that distribution, right? It's going to take 12 weeks and it's going to cost $700,000, right? And then you adjust based on, are we less mature than the sample size or are we more mature than them? Like what are factors that may help us adjust from that average and from that mean? And the research found that like when you start looking at things like roads, nuclear power plants, those big infrastructure projects, it's more precise to estimate that way, which I've just outlined, than doing it the bottom up way,
Right.
right? Bottom up way, like you're always going to be way off. And
Right.
so if you're able to do that by speaking to people behind the case studies, by trying to find benchmark data, that sort of thing, then it's going to come inform your estimate exercise in a much more meaningful way than to try to get everybody, your IT department and your procurement department who have never done this before to try to guesstimate how long
Right.
things are going to take and or you're asking vendors through an RFP, which creates a dilemma, a prisoner's dilemma. And we all have a bias in procurement for like the lowest cost option, right?
Yes.
And vendors know that, and so they're not going to give you the realistic option. They're going to give you like the best case scenario most of the time, right? And so
Right.
you need to also think of like who's giving me this data and like what is their incentive to give me that data and how does that color the data that they're giving me, right? And that's exactly also why I talk about case studies in the way that I do, right? People are, if they're putting on a case study, it's because they want to seem successful in whatever they did, right? They're not going
Right.
to, most people are not going to do a case study of a train wreck project, right? That just doesn't
Right.
happen. To answer your question, yeah, directly, like I'd say, take a look at reference class forecasting, which is, in my opinion, the most underestimated or underrated way to estimate the cost and timeline of a project.
And one of the interesting thing that comes up is that because of the way we see success, we take success as granted, right? We don't think that success is actually an exceptional result. It has to be celebrated and it never has to be taken as granted. So if you are successful, it's the best thing that could happen, not
And it
the
goes
other.
back to like our seat at the table discussion, right?
Right.
Like it's if procurement does its job right, like just it's silence, right?
Yeah.
Nothing happens.
Right.
Operations just keep running, right? So exactly what you're saying. So there is a part of it as well, which is you need to celebrate them. You need to be public with your successes, right? As much as possible because perception of reality is as important as reality, I always say.
Right. So I think good discussion. Now moving on, after tech is AI. So let's talk about AI. What are your views on AI? And
Yep. So AI is just a better hammer, right? In the sense
right,
where it's just a natural progression and
right,
iteration of a tool. And we get like the hype of like, oh, artificial general intelligence is here.
right,
But like just over the weekend, there's an AGI test that came out, like, and they keep adjusting for the test, and so the test changes and gets harder. But Claude, which is the best model that
right,
performed on the AGI test, got a result of 0.03%.
right. Yes,
Because you essentially you put it as a
right,
novel problem in front of it, right? And it was funny because humans figure it out, right? It's a game,
yeah,
and you eventually like there's colors and there's shapes, and you eventually figure out the relationship between the colors and the shape and the objective of
right,
the game. But the LLMs can't do that, right? So I think that how close we are to AGI is overhyped, right? However, there are amazing capabilities that have been developed with these LLM models since the ChatGPT moment in 2022, right? Yeah, it's a better hammer in the sense where everything we discussed on the podcast remains, right? I still need to know what my objective is, what my strategy is, what my spend profile is, like what problem am I looking to optimize for? And
right,
then the art of understanding LLMs and AI is part of that art of the possible wheel, right? And so I understand that I can now use an LLM to generate human sounding text, right? And so
right,
where can I apply that in creating RFPs and looking at spend data and giving me insights in words, right? And then it's looking at, okay, well, what are the strengths and weaknesses of an LLM, right? And then how do I apply it in context to different business problems, right? So to me, all the same thing, just another tool, a new tool in the tool belt to help me solve business problems in a more mature way, potentially.
right. Yep, I totally agree to it that it is the next step of the evolution, and it is a better hammer. I couldn't have put it better than what you said. It is what it is. The kind of confidence people have on AI, I still like it, but eventually it has to prove itself as well.
Yeah, and it's there's no magic bullets in
Yes,
technology, right? So LLMs are just an automation tool that allow for much more ambiguity than, for example, RPA or robotic process automation used to do, right? Where
right,
if like it met a rule or a situation that you didn't plan for, it just broke, right? Or just stopped. Whereas LLM will start doing stuff, right? But is it the right things? I don't know.
right.
Right? So how do we give constraints and barriers so that we get to the outcomes that we're looking for consistently?
Now moving on with AI and procurement and all, and especially with Procure Tech Cup that you organize, what are the future trends that you see, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, the one trend that I've covered on the newsletter a lot is what I'm calling like the great convergence.
Mhm.
So we used to have source to pay suites, right? Or we
Right.
still do, right? The
Yes, we
Coupas,
still
the
do.
Aribas, the Ivaluas, the Jaggers. GEP. And we have these newer entrants which had built themselves either intake and orchestration platforms or procurement
Right.
platforms, end-to-end procurement platforms, right? And you've got about 12, 13, 15 players that are, and I'm speaking of the enterprise space, which is what I typically cover. And what I'm seeing is like you have all of these older players that were more focused on everything except intake and orchestration, put out intake and orchestration functionality, right? And on
Mm.
the flip side, all of these intake and orchestration tools are putting out functionality to four different procurement sub processes, right? Sourcing, contract management, SRM.
Right.
And so they're sort of becoming one and the same software category because of that, right?
Mhm.
And then you've got, of course, all of the best of breed pure play players that focus just on a specific subdomain of procurement, which that remains valid and but for everybody else who's trying to be the platform end to end for procurement, like we're coming into a time where procurement can measure older suites that have been around a long time with newer players, like within the same Procure Tech RFP event, if I can put it that way. And if you structure it right, you can also measure best of breeds in the same way as well, right? So as much as there is more different companies serving procurement with technology, right? We've talked about 650 companies the last time I was counted by Michael Lemover, who's also another blogger slash analyst in the space. And I think that's going to keep going. I think we're going to still see, but to me, the lens by which to view the market like is getting simpler,
Right.
right? I don't.
Yes. And it is interesting as to how things would shape up going forward. About Procure Tech Cup, where are we with Procure Tech Cup? Are you starting it for
Yeah.
2026 or is
Yeah, so what we did this year is we actually put on a virtual conference. So
Mhm.
we're hosting about 60 procurement professionals who own a digital roadmap, so who are tasked with looking at technology and figuring out how we're going to best use technology in our business. We're inviting them to a 3 half-day conference where we have 10 vendors presenting, and they're all representing a different box in that framework that we've been discussing during this conversation. So we've got a sourcing vendor, a spend analytics vendor, a P2P vendor, an end-to-end platform vendor, an SRM vendor, et cetera. And so to me, it's like everything that I've been discussing with you on steroids, which is like come for 3 half days, right? Morning if
Mhm.
you're in North America, evening if you're in Europe, EMEA, and we'll show you, the framework and everything within like an art of the possible, essentially within each pieces of that framework. And the people that attend the conference will vote on who the best educator was, and that's who wins the cup this year, right? So there's that, and then in parallel, we're also doing like the more classic format on LinkedIn where people can vote for their favorite provider by solution category as well. So that will happen in parallel to the conference, but it's very much complementary. And so every year we're trying to, add a layer, add a new dimension to the exercise, always with the same goal and mission of educating procurement pros on the art of possible with tech.
I look forward to it and good luck. May the best company wins again.
Yeah, or the one with the most people in its orbit, right?
I mean, that's always there, but you just have to think that the best guy gets the most people.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that I wanted to touch before we end this is any fresher or somebody who has just started off. If they are listening to this podcast, how would you say about procurement as a
Yeah, I
career
think
to
it's
them?
very dynamic, right? And I think our conversation has been an illustration of that. And so I'd go back to what we said earlier around like make sure you're doing something that you enjoy, right?
Mhm.
Very important. That the market values, right, is willing to pay you for, and that you're good at, right? And if you can find something at the intersection of those three things, don't ask yourself too many existential questions,
Right.
right? Like just do it. Like tell yourself you'll do it for 5 years. You'll learn stuff, I guarantee it, and then it might steer you in another direction. But if you're always navigating your career from opportunity to opportunity by making sure you're jumping through the circle at the middle of those three hoops, you're gonna end up somewhere that you're proud of. I think that's the message, right? You'll end up passionate about your career, Because I think the worst piece of advice that we can give young people is like do something you're passionate about, right? Which is silly, right? Because I find you build passion over time by developing a mastery, a sense of purpose, and autonomy over your work, right? Deciding on what you're going to work on next,
Right,
right?
yes.
Which at the beginning of your career, you have limited sway and decision over what you're going to work on unless you start your own business from the start, right? But like those three things will grow over time and you will become passionate about your career.
Yeah, and that intersection that you're saying, that small space, I think that is called ikagi, if I'm not.
Oh, maybe. It still feels like work to me, but it's work I enjoy, right? Like I'm always happy to take a vacation.
Right, yes.
But it's also like you need to realize you're always working towards that, right? And it's not a switch. It's a
Right.
continuum, right? It's not like I'm not passionate. Oh, now I'm passionate.
Yeah.
It's more like I get more and more passionate over time as I navigate this, figure it out, and take decisions that are in line with the two frameworks we outlined, right? The Ikagi one, and then also building mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
Yeah. Right. So, Joel, I'm pretty much done with my questions. I think it's wonderful to talk to you. Anybody who is listening to this, if you want to know about tech, procurement, digital implementation, I think Joel is one stop where you need to check out. Do you want to share your contact information? I'll put it in the comments.
Sure, the best way is probably through LinkedIn, right? Or at newsletter.pureprocurement.ca, where you could sign up to the newsletter that I send every Sunday night. So you can get in touch with me by just replying to that as well. Right? Like there's always a search engine on the website, but the best search engine is also in my head, right? So so
Yeah.
I'm happy to help people along their journey as best as I can.
Yes, and that is so true. The best engine, search engine is here. If you're not inquisitive about something, then there is no point.
Well, I want to take the opportunity to just say thank you for inviting me, Super Tim, and to having me on the show. As we were talking offline, I said there's not a lot of like long form, more relaxed content in the procurement space, and so I appreciate the opportunity to dive into a couple topics with you a bit more in detail than I usually do.
No, thank you as well. It's been a good learning for me. I hope whoever is listening to this, it's a good learning for them as well.
Oh, maybe I can end with like a Canadian cliche, which is keep your stick on the ice, right? Like if you keep playing, you'll eventually figure it out how to score goals.
Ice hockey.
Yeah. It's a super hard sport because you need to know how to skate, you need to know how to
Yes,
handle a
right,
puck with the stick, and
right,
then you need to also be aware of your surroundings as people are skating around and not, hit into them. So
right.
it's no, it's a pretty tough sport to get right. I was always a short track speed skater, right? So with the long blades. I just like to play on the Canadian cliches.
That's nice. That's a good thing. Thank you. Again, lots of good learning, Joel. Thank you for doing this. And to everybody who is listening, thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel.